Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Engineering Tech Show. And here are your hosts, Goshi King and Joe Green.
They also do multifamily too. That's another part.
You should discuss that.
Yeah.
Joe,
Goshi.
passive house can be up to 86% energy efficient when it comes to heating. And you are passive house certified consultant.
Yes, I'm a certified passive house consultant.
Yes. Okay, I had it backwards.
A little bit.
Okay, that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you explain to our audience what is passive house?
I would love to. So, passive house, it started off, I would say, in the 60s or 70s, right? Probably in the 70s when the energy crisis hit. Kind of had a brief stint in the U.S. where these people wanted to...
Wait, when again?
In it was either the 60s or 70s.
The energy crisis, the infamous energy crisis
Yeah.
you're talking about.
So
Okay.
no, that was in the 70s, but I don't know if it started a little before that, but it started in the U.S. Then it didn't really make it very long, and Germany picked it up a little bit later on. Kind of grew popularity there, and in the last maybe 10, 20 years, it came back to America, and now we have there's a United States kind of branch of the passive house. And there's also still one in Germany as well.
Who's responsible for the standards and whatnot for a passive house?
So passive house, they do their own standards. They came up with their own, design criteria, did their own, kind of testing and economic analysis to see what works. They play off of in America, like the Department of Energy has a zero energy ready homes, which that kind of talks, I guess, about how to make your home net zero. It ties into that.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
For my audience, what is net zero?
Net zero, there's one way to look at it is you are going to produce on site as much energy as you consume. There's, I think passive house has changed the way that they interpret net zero, and kind of changes around a little bit. I think in general, you can either do it so you are kind of looking instant by instant, are you producing more than you use, or you can sum it up on an annual basis. If you do the annual basis, you probably are going to rely on grid energy, something like that as well.
So if when the passive house is built, does that have to go through a certain amount of testing to prove that it's net zero?
So they have their own, badge or ribbon for net zero.
Uh-huh.
The certification itself does have quite a few little testing, but also design review along the way. So when you're in maybe early in the project, let's say you have your plans, you know what your home's going to look like, you have an engineer and architect on board, they would do a preliminary submittal to passive house. They would look at your plans, your energy model that kind of has information on how much energy it's going to use, your peak heating and cooling loads, your total cooling and heating energy. They review it to make sure it meets their standards and that it's going to be a good design. One thing with the passive house, because you have, maybe like 3-4 times the amount of insulation than a typical home.
What is the typical R value for this?
So I would say walls are going to be like R40 to R60.
Oh my gosh, because what residential, I think, and I could be wrong here, but it's anywhere between R10 to R13 or something like that.
Yeah.
Think of a 4-inch stud wall that, you can put a bad insulation in, and I think it's R3 per inch. So you got 3.5 inches of that, right?
Yep.
That's 10.5, and then you've got, your sheathing and, water and vapor barrier with siding. So that those don't really have any, good of an R value. They're just, half-inch sheathing and whatnot. So
Yeah.
So roughly around R12, R13 is where your house is, and here you are with passive house. You've bumped to nearly 4 times.
Yeah. It is a huge hit. Sometimes they do these, I forget what they're called. Basically, they may have like a double wall, so they'll have, just to get their required R insulation, R value,
Yeah.
they'll need maybe 12 inches of insulation, sometimes more. It's
I'm gonna
it's a
pass.
commitment. I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah. We're jumping boats here quite a bit. But back to and you've given a brief history of what passive house when it started and how it landed here in America. America. But for a layman, Joe, before we continue, for a layman, for a person who is not an engineer or not a technical person, it's the first time they're hearing about passive house, passive homes. What is it?
So it's basically a design method
For a house.
For a house. So primarily, I think they started with homes, houses. Now you can do multifamily. You can do offices.
Like apartments?
Yeah.
Okay.
Apartments.
Condos, things like that.
Hotels, yeah.
Yeah.
I would say now you could kind of do any building. Some buildings are going to be, I guess, better for it. So I'll just give a quick idea of their criteria. I mean, one of the main things is your source energy use. So they will look at kind of including any like transmission losses in the electrical grid, any, I guess, a little bit of the inefficiency to get like natural gas or propane or oil to a site. They account for that like total energy usage, which means like it's very well compared to our typical office. You're not going to get it without going to some extremes. And if you get like a laboratory or somewhere with a lot of internal equipment use, it can be difficult, I think, to get it. There's still ways. You have to probably pay a lot more attention, maybe work with them to work through details on kind of the elevated loads and stuff like that.
So the idea is, Joe, that the passive house is just an alternate to your standard house, but it's very, very efficient in terms of, its operating cost in terms of energy, though you pay a lot less electricity and a lot less to heat and cool the house.
Yes.
That's the idea, right? That's what the...
Yep, that's the idea. And this one key thing is, you have very low energy use, but comfortable home. So, they do have heat, you'd have cooling, you'd have ventilation.
So what do you say, like, for example, in a standard home, if it's a cheap home, I don't think that they allow single pane without, storm windows anymore. But if, like, say you have an old home with the single pane windows, that's not going to fly in a passive house.
That would not even come close. Yeah,
right.
You would get kicked out, I think.
Yeah.
You typically, double pane glass would be tough.
To meet the criteria?
Yeah, especially if you had a big building, you might be able to get away with it because you kind of have...
other credits?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But triple pane glass is the typical, I guess,
that's
window
amazing.
that you would need for it. I
mean,
obviously, our climate too.
Filled with argon air in the gaps. Yeah. Yeah.
That's, I guess one thing they really focus on, typical buildings, they breathe. Your walls, windows especially, lets air in and out.
Sure. Kind
of keeps air moving. If you have some moisture in your walls, it's going to dry out kind of naturally just because you get that air movement. With passive homes, they're very airtight. So you don't have much infiltration, which is like outdoor air coming in through cracks and stuff. And so you have to be very careful if you have, because if you do get moisture in your wall, it's going to stay there.
Are you telling me that then for a passive house, you have to have some sort of a ventilation system?
Yes. Yep. They would highly recommend like a little energy recovery ventilator.
Yeah, like Renew Air type of unit.
Renew Air, yeah. They have...
are they certified? Are they passive house certified?
They might have some. I don't think they're a big one. There's... I I guess we can talk about
Gold
there's
unit, Swagon Gold is...
Swagon. There's
Oh, by
it's
the
a
way,
thing-
guys, let
yeah.
me cut you off there. This is not a publicity for
Nope.
either one of them. We're just something that we use at work, and we know that they make those products.
But it's opened up a market for it. I mean, now that there's this passive houses gain traction, there are more companies making, like, I don't know, tiny 100, 200 CFM little
Right.
ventilators that can, like, fit in a
In
closet.
your attic,
Yeah.
yeah.
And, I mean, they're super efficient, probably very quiet nowadays.
Yep, energy. So whatever is
Yeah.
exhausted out of that is also recovered. Energy is recovered on its way out.
Yeah.
Around probably 60 to 80% of it.
Yeah.
Depends
I think
on-
at
yeah.
least, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible.
So I think most of our commercial ones would probably not meet their efficiency requirements.
Yeah. Before we segue into our next segment of this podcast, is there anything else you want to add about the passive homes?
I would say one thing that I mean, I've never done a project with it. I have learned about it, but I think it's kind of neat that they focus just on, like, a few criteria, especially on the energy use. They
Sure.
don't get into, like, nitty-gritty. I mean, like, this other, I don't know what you call it, organization, the lead by the USGBC, they have a lot of, it's almost like they're micromanaging your project. With Passive
Sure.
House, they give you a lot more freedom to achieve the results. And
Are they independent of government agencies? Or are they somewhat or are they involved somehow?
I think they're independent.
I
I know
like
they
that.
work with government agencies to
Sure.
do research to get information.
Yeah.
They are really closely involved with this other institute. It's called the Fraunhofer Institute.
That's right.
But I think that one, I haven't looked into that. I think it's also independent
I think so.
too.
Yeah, I think so. This is what's great about, market.
Yep.
The free markets provide solutions. Yes, they come at a cost, but in the life cycle of a house, if you're going to pay upfront 4 times the installation to build a house and materials, you're going to save so much money. So payback may be there, may
Yeah.
not be there. Depends on the size and the
Mhm.
and how the house is built. That's an analysis that an engineer like myself or Joe can do, especially since Joe is a certified
Yeah.
passive house consultant.
I think they get a mix of people who just want to go for it, and obviously money is not an issue.
Mm-hmm.
So then they can probably go a little crazy. Maybe they will put on, like, PV
Yeah.
in order to offset some of their energy use to meet
Right.
the standard.
Right.
But I think also it makes a lot of, I guess that's another benefit. Up here, we can lose power quite often
By
in the
up
winter.
here, you mean New England?
New England, yeah.
Yeah.
And so these homes, I mean, like, if you lose power, if you don't have backup heat or something, you might be able to keep your inside above 60s for, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 days a week
Mm-hmm.
versus normal homes that, I don't know, might be able to last a day or something like that.
Yeah.
So they're definitely much more resilient in that aspect of it.
So obviously the cost is probably a major factor in deciding between a Energy Star home versus a passive house.
Yes.
If you have everything that's so airtight, the materials that are used, and then they have to be non-breathable and so forth, and some added work that you need for ventilation and exhaust and make up air for maybe your kitchen
Yep.
appliances and your dryer,
Yeah.
for instance.
It has probably a lot. I mean, that's just it. Like, a lot of homes in the Northeast are probably not air conditioned fully. And
Correct.
for this, yeah, I mean, you'd be adding air conditioning, and
Yeah.
definitely it's, you pay for it, but you would get, I guess, a comfort kind of payback as well, which
That's right.
you don't really
Yeah, I mean, if
see.
for example, if a house, is up to 86% efficient, and we'll talk about the other efficiencies, for example, cooling efficiencies. Oh, as a matter of fact, why don't you jump in? So you said that, a house could be up to 86% efficient when it comes to heating.
Yep.
Right? So if you're paying $100 a month in heating bill, and in an average home, you'd only be paying $26 to heat your house.
Yeah. Something
Right.
like that. Yep.
Actually, no, $16.
Yeah.
Sorry, my arithmetic was off a little there.
Mhm.
It's nothing new.
Yeah.
For cooling, what does it look like in cooling? Is it around 50%?
Cooling was, yeah, like 40, 50%,
Uh-huh.
something like that.
Right. So again, if you're on an average house of the same size, if you were going to pay $100 to cool your house per month,
Mm-hmm.
then in a passive house you would pay $50 to $55, something like that.
Yep.
So that's a major dent.
Yeah.
And air conditioning equipment doesn't have to be any fancier. It could be.
That's then you save on the size of it too. So maybe it's half or a third.
Joe, what do you think about like having a separate podcast on passive house appliances and air conditioning means and methods?
That's a great idea.
Because the
Maybe go
reason
into
why I say
detail.
that is because we can go down this rabbit hole and never come out of it,
Yep.
right? So, and I think that would require a separate podcast, maybe some weeks down the road.
That sounds like a plan.
Okay. Right. Let me ask you this, Joe. Since we're talking about homes and we're talking about, energy efficiency, America in particular, and maybe some parts of Europe, has a emerging trend, that, and you and I actually personally know someone who is into tiny living, tiny homes. There are tiny homes on wheels. There are tiny homes like cabin styles that are put in woods, and ponds, lakes, etc., etc. And what are the chances that passive house technology can be implemented to a small house, a tiny house? And by tiny house, I don't mean like maybe we'll segue into that too after this. But I don't mean like the container homes or anything. I mean like the actual
Like the tiny house that fits on a trailer.
Yes.
Kind of thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're becoming famous. They
Yeah.
have they're just made out of wood or aluminum framing, and they have all the amenities. It's kind of like a big Class A RV on wheels,
Mhm.
except that it's maybe 2-story this time or something like that, and people it's made out of. It looks like a home, but it's tiny.
Mhm. I think it could. You might just think about the whole cost. It'd be obviously it's going to make it quite a bit more expensive, especially with a tiny home. I mean, you're gonna lose, I guess, a lot of that footprint to a wall. So you'd have to obviously make kind of changes there. Maybe find ways to make your floor space more efficient. I would say the ideas of construction would definitely apply because, I mean, even if you don't make it to meet the standards of passive house, you could, make sure you don't have any like thermal breaks in your construction. That's just gonna create more heat loss. You can, just take the good practice of designing your windows to, I guess that's if you have maybe a little tricky because you don't know what orientation you'll park in. But you can design your windows to provide more solar gain or less if you want.
Sure.
So you can
And then
take
again,
the knowledge.
And again, like we were talking about a single pane, double pane windows. With a passive house, tiny house, it would again meet those requirements. So it would be triple pane type of efficient window. Maybe have some glazing on it. Depends on what side you parked up. Up here in Northeast, if your windows are facing south, in the summer, south or southwest, it's going to have a lot of solar gain.
That's a good point. But I guess if you have a tiny house, you just make a U-turn and you can kind of.
That's right. Change direction.
Yeah.
Well, you have to know these things,
Yeah.
you can't expect an average person to know what to do. Now, what you can do is that you can have maybe motorized. We're mechanical engineers. Every time I think of something, I think of motors.
Yeah.
You can have motorized exterior shades.
Yeah.
Right.
Get some nice awnings or something.
Something like that would just cover it so that as the sun is coming up, and it gets to a proper trajectory, you have it pre-programmed. So I mean, we're adding money to the tiny house, and I think most of the time it's not just the lifestyle; it's debt-free living. People do it because they want to live debt-free, so they get these tiny homes that are $20,000-$30,000, and they're paid off in a year or two. And they love that lifestyle because now they have more freedom to move about and have more money to do the things they enjoy doing.
Yeah.
Like traveling. In my case, I love traveling. So if I were to be able to live a tiny house life, that's where my money would go, traveling.
Best with a kind of semi-passive tiny house, you could go to different areas and you're building your home is more or less going to be pretty comfortable.
Yeah.
Especially, I mean, if you can be comfortable up here, we do have some pretty, we get what's 80s, 90s, and humid lately, and then in the winters it's the other extreme. So
That's
you
right.
could go almost anywhere, and you'll probably be okay.
That's right. So one of the things that has me thinking about, this whole passive house and the tiny homes business is the need for poor people, especially homeless people's need for homes. And I think this is a good point. Would you agree? A good point to segue into, because look at this, Joe. I think that capitalism has been providing, different means and methods for all classes of people to implement and to improve their lives. Wouldn't you agree with that statement?
I would agree with that.
So passive home technology is one of them. And then there are, the tiny house movement, if you want to call it that. Some people do call it that. Tiny house movement is not about lifestyle minimalism, but is also about economics, right? And we libertarians, the ANCAPs, love economics because everything is economics, right? Like our politics. People loved Ron Paul because he was an MD, right? A doctor, a gynecologist, I believe. Yet
I think he was a general
was he?
practitioner.
All right, maybe
I don't know.
He did deliver babies. I've
Okay,
heard.
that's OBGYN.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
He did deliver babies or at least I saw it in memes, but whatever the case may be. He was an MD, but he was also an economist, a self-taught economist, right? So his son Rand is pretty much on the same track. And we're Rothbardian, so Murray Rothbard was the greatest economist that lived in few decades ago. So you think about, when we think about things, we think about economics too, right? It's human action, right? And so when people are saying, I want to live a minimal life and I want to live in a tiny house, right? Or people there may be people who want to live in a tiny house, but then they can improve that by a few more $1,000s drastically to turn it into a passive house, right? And save even more, right? So that's one. And my other thing is, like, how can this... Well, let me circle back a little bit, because I'm asking too many questions. Here's the thing. Capitalism is also helping, whether people know it or not, helping homeless people provide them homes in the shape and form of, like, these container homes that are coming from China or are made here. What do you think about that?
About their container homes
Yeah.
and stuff like that. Wow, that was I don't know, one you showed me, like the kind of pop-up pre-folded homes. That was pretty
400
neat.
some odd, I think 480 square
Yeah.
foot home that comes from China. It costs less than $10,000.
I think the idea of these, I mean, that's just, you can get mass-produced kind of.
No, wait,
small-
pop-up. The pop-up one was like less than $3,000.
There was one was like 1 or 2,000.
Yeah,
I
the
think
folded one that's completely folded in it, but that one is only 10 by 20, I think.
That's
Or
I
8
guess
by
that's
10.
it though. Like, it's enough for, at least to start, it's enough for someone to live and get their feet on the ground,
Well,
and then they can expand. But I would say, I mean, if it's some, like, I don't know, obviously it'd be nice to have a couple of those arranged and you can have an actual home.
Joe, you cannot have nice things. This is America.
Yeah.
We have zoning guys, zoning off officials,
Yeah.
quote unquote, and you have the building code inspectors who'll never allow you to have a place, a shelter. They rather have you sleep in a tent that's cut open by police, blades, the knives.
Yeah.
Then they would have you live in one of these relatively better tiny homes that are pop-up and cheap.
When I was I lived in San Diego for a while, and there's a pretty big homeless population there. I was thinking about this on my way over here. It's kind of funny. There's a big homeless population and an extremely large military population. I mean, honestly, you could probably fit all of the homeless and more in some of those military bases as well, and give them
Really?
comfortable homes.
Yeah.
They could have apartments, you know. So
We
I mean,
can't have that, Joe.
it's not like it's, you know, the land is
We
there.
can't mix
It's-
civilians with
yeah.
officials.
It'd be horrible. But, you know, I guess right now most of them live on the beach, which honestly, it's not a horrible for them. You know, they get to sit on the beach. They collect bottles to make some money. They do a lot of the recycling
Cleaning,
that
yeah.
people don't do.
Right.
You know, so it's
Well,
sort
obviously
of,
they're picking something that someone else threw on the ground.
Yeah, yeah.
Um.
So it's they kind of provide I mean, maybe it's an extreme, but they provide a service, and they might, you know, ask you for some change. Some of them do. Some of them are pretty chill and leave you alone.
Do you remember, since you mentioned California, you remember this musicians right out of L.A.? There was a story that was really famous either earlier this year or last year or something, who was making tiny homes for people, homeless people in L.A.
I don't.
So what had happened was this guy is a musician, white dude, with a little mohawk and, you know, like typical. I don't know what the genre of his music was, but my guess is probably rock or something like
punk,
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, something
Yeah.
like that. And what he was doing was he had met this lady, and I forget her name, but it's on YouTube. You can watch it. You know, Reason Magazine covered this this story. That what he did is, for total cost of $1,200, he would make an 8x8 tiny house for each homeless person. And what he did is he made first one, which was smaller. He made it for this lady that he, you know, became friends with, and she was 60-some years old, and she had some medical troubles, and, you know, he felt bad for her, so he's, you know, instead of her sleeping on the road and her stuff all over the place, he made her a very decent 8x8 or something along those lines, right at the side of the road, with wheels at the bottom. It had a little solar panel on it, so, you know, there was like a couple of bulbs that can operate, and it also had a phone charger that, you know, you can plug in, just all solar. Small little, tiny little solar panel that did all this. And then he went on a GoFundMe or something like that, and he wanted to raise $100,000. Well, within first week, he raised $50,000, and that thing just took off. So what he started doing is he started making these 8x8 for a lot of people, and within no time that caught wind, and the local LA people were upset about that, because they were like, oh, these are popping up in my street, and that, you know, my property value is going to go down because now I have these people living next to me, right? As shitty as it sounds, I do understand their concern, because if it was you and me, we wouldn't want, you know, someone across from the road living in this a tiny little box.
But they're not homeless anymore.
They're not homeless anymore. Right. So this guy did like this such a great service, you know, and you know, from voluntarily raised money. So the mayor came in, and some other officials, and they sort of banned this whole operation, and they went in and started picking them up, and tossing them to just destroy them, right? Take them to the junkyard, or not junkyard, but the dump, and pretty much trash them, right? So one of the things, and that was usually where, you know, they were located, and like, you know, over the, you know, bridge connectors and things like that. And then there were some other people who'd come out, and, you know, they had open free parking lots, and were like, yeah, no, bring them here, put them here.
Yeah.
And so the guy's still making them. As a matter of fact, he's also, from what I remember watching a YouTube, I don't know how long ago it was, but he was also making a mobile shower unit, because these didn't have bathrooms or you know, a shower facility. It was just sleeping places. And so he's trying to make mobile shower places where, you know, all these homeless people can then during the day shower and, you know, get cleaned up.
That's pretty neat, especially in that area. You just like hang up a black bag with water. It's going to get hot enough for a nice shower.
Right, but my question to you, Joe, is that, you know, state is always going to be a hurdle, right? And then private property owners will do the same, right? So the solutions are there, but my question is, what do you think of these homes, tiny homes, you know, in sort of like public places on roads?
I mean, I would say interesting question. I know with like LA, I think they do have a lot of areas, highways and stuff like that. Even San Diego, you have a lot of areas where like between the highways, around the like on ramp, off ramps, that are like little wooded, I don't know, maybe like 100 by 100 little circles or something like that. And you will see tents popped up there. So obviously, like, homeless people will come there and stay there until they get kicked out. I see no reason. No one's using that land. They're not going to cut down trees. If anything, I mean, they will set up a camp. They might, they're not going to, I mean, I guess relatively they might leave some garbage behind. But if that is like their home, I would think they're going to respect it a little bit more. And I personally, I see no reason. No one's using it. It's not going to harm anyone. Some people might be pissed because these guys have kind of a sweet spot, I would say.
So I think that there are many solutions, Joe, that, and I was thinking about this, and you and I had this discussion just few days ago. Because here's the thing, if someone were to put a box, just a square box out in front of my house, I probably wouldn't like it, right? That's just natural reaction, especially if you have kids who are walking around, stuff like that. If it's on a sidewalk, and my kids, if I had kids and they have bicycles or something and they use the sidewalk, if it's blocked up, I'm now scared that they have to go on the road and all that stuff. So number one, they're eyesores to people, right?
Yep.
To just insensitive people, right? And number two is they may be a little bit of hazard.
Yeah.
Depends on where they are again. The solution to that is that, people, just like people have raised money to collect to get these homes made, can do the same way to collect money and buy empty lands or lots, or any lot that, an existing building can be demolished and these can be put in or something like that, right?
So you could take an existing building, abandoned spot. Even by us, we have the abandoned mill buildings.
The problem with that is that kind of becomes a shelter. Yeah. And a lot of these homeless people don't like shelter. A lot of these people, the reason why they don't go to shelters is because of the drama that comes with it. They're bed bugs, they're trash, they're not clean, they can't bring stuff inside. They have their own personal belongings they cannot bring in. They have to be in there at a certain hour. They have to leave a certain hour. There are just rules that, these people can and cannot, live by, So the shelter, so when you have a one building and everything is inside, that becomes sort of like a communal problem. But when you have a box that have a steel door and you have your own key, it gives you so much more independence and a feeling that this place is mine. It's so much different, like you were mentioning earlier, that they have much more respect for it. They are much more attachment to them, And all of a sudden they're like, you know what, this is maybe a transitional place. I can be in here. I can be looking for job during the days and whatever. But at the end of the day, my stuff is safe. I can come back in, that sort of thing, right?
Gives them a sense of property too.
That's exactly right. Like it gives them a sense of property, private property, right? But if they are eyesores, there are solutions, and this is where I'm going to tie in the containers to the passive house. Passive house R40 requirement or whatever that is, right? Is because that R stands for how much heat is lost through the walls, right? And so imagine, this is an imagination, this is just me talking, right? I'm sure it's much more difficult than what I'm about to say. Is that imagine you have all these highways, and then you have these, here in Northeast we have these highways, and then we have this 100 foot space in between the highways, right? And on the sides and the shoulders and whatnot, that you could literally start digging and bury these containers, the 20-foot containers, right? Because what is it, Joe? The earth temperature doesn't change after you go below certain feet, right? So you can maintain with a little bit of insulation. You can literally turn these container homes into a passive house type of structure. I'm not saying they're going to be passive houses. I'm just saying that the heat losses through the walls, right, can be achieved if they are buried in the ground with some sort of like structure that people can go in and out of them easily, right? These staircases are installed, et cetera, right? They can also be made prettier, so you have maybe glazing. So you have maybe like a vestibule on top that has glazing, so it almost looks like the type of structure when you're entering a subway in a big city, right? You go, and then you see this beautiful structure. You open the door, you go inside, and then you go down to get to subway. So this could be something that, if it's an eyesore, and if the private property is a problem, there's plenty of public property that public domain has been used to confiscate from people of America. I don't think finding a property is a problem. I think the problem is our tolerance towards homelessness. So I feel like there is a possible solution, because the capitalists around the world have provided that solution. A container is very strong. It doesn't need any much more reinforcement than what it already has to be buried in the ground or even placed in places, right? As long as it's anchored and certain, mobile home requirements are met, you've got some grounding going that you need for, like, I don't know, like lightning scenarios, things like that, right? And you can very easily provide a 20-foot container, which is usually an 8-foot wide, 8-foot tall, 20-foot long, versus an 8x8 that costs $1,200. You can easily provide even more space. You can install bathroom and shower in it, stuff like that. What do you think?
I think that's a good idea. I think you give them the 40-foot little luxury for the special units. I guess obviously land, whatever.
Well, think about the women with children, right? Like because what happens is when you become a homeless, what happens to your children? States take your children away from you, right? Do they still have that right? I don't really think so. Yeah, I'm homeless, but the state doesn't own my children. Yeah, the situation sucks for the children because all of them are homeless, right? But the solutions are a lot easier than what state actually does. And the story that I'm telling about this LA guy, the musician, it was incredible because their solutions, they had an existing program that was not helping. I think the homelessness population in that little small town or something like that was like 24,000 people or something along those lines. That's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right? And we here in New England, we've seen some homeless people. Right.
Yeah, I know when I went to Montreal as a kid, it surprised me to see at first homeless up there because the winters are not easy. If you're not warm, you're going to die.
That's right. It gets very, very cold.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, that's all I had for homelessness problem. I think that capitalism has and can provide us solutions to solving homelessness problem and improve, it has been improving the quality of homes and the lifestyles of the people.
There was one thing I'd actually like to get your pick on or your ideas. One thing, I don't know if you've heard it, like they might call it like squatters' rights is one word for it. But just the idea that if there is unused land and, no one is using it, no one really has maybe someone has claim to, I don't think anyone has a claim to it. Like unused land, if someone, let's say, comes in, puts up some of these tiny homes for homeless, like maybe on the outskirts of Boston in some abandoned warehouse lots, and they live there for a few years, I'm sure at some point someone's going to notice it and say something. But how do you feel about just the idea of someone, I don't know, homesteading, kind of taking land that's not used, no one's using it, no one
that's right
really has a claim?
We libertarians don't believe that state has a right to own property, right? All property shall be private property. And Murray Rothbard, in this book right behind you, in For Liberty, I think it's called For Liberty. What's it called? The book For New Liberty. He has a chapter on homesteading. He also talks about private property, the concept of private property, and he talks about when you mix your labor with a land, right? That the land has never been owned before, or does not have any legitimate ownership, then you can have a claim on it. And so, absolutely, I agree with that. That the land that's not, the used, people who want to come in and homestead. He's, in his homestead chapter, you'd follow. And then, there's like things that you can do and cannot do, what violates non-aggression principle, and what violates other people's property rights, and so forth. That is all explained in there. So yeah, I agree.
So I know when I've been driving around my brothers around like New York City, New Jersey area, there's a lot of abandoned like factories or warehouses there. I mean, steel buildings, windows busted out, but it looks like a lot of land that is just abandoned. I don't think I've seen anyone move around it. If anything, kids go there for graffiti and little vandalism, kind of hide out from authority.
I think I kind of know the type of buildings you're talking about because, driving around in New England, I see these old towns, small towns maybe, where there used to be some mills, right, at the bank of a brook or a river, and they're all abandoned. And not only abandoned, but the state has signs that says, no trespassing, crap like that. And I'm almost willing to bet that it's the state that's, preventing people in the name of the safety that, the fear is that, a brick might fall from the roof or a window might fall down, stuff like that. But nothing that's not fixable, all you have to do is, as a private ownership, take ownership of the building if the town lets you, which is mostly the problem. You can make it workable. I see no reasons. They're still standing there. They've been there since 1800s. What's the problem now, right? It's just always the state, in the name of the safety, public safety, that they prevent people from being.
They're looking out for your best interest.
Yeah, making sure you stay homeless. I mean, what is it that Ron Paul said that over 20 soldiers commit suicide every day? A lot of them are homeless.
Yeah.
I mean, that's insane.
This is it. You could also, like you were saying with your little, container idea, you can kind of form a community too, which is something a lot of these guys, maybe they have tiny ones, but could be something a little bit better.
No, so there. Before we wrap it up, and I have one more last segue. But like the couple of things that I was looking at, Joe, is one of them was the China Magic folding container house.
Yeah.
That takes about 4 minutes to open up, and that one is literally a 20-foot container that's got a door, 2 windows, and that's pretty much it. And it's 20 by 8. So, 160 square feet. And then the other container, the China expandable container house that takes 10 minutes, is actually a full 20-foot container. And what happens is on each side of the container, the first wall folds up like this. It goes upwards.
I think you might have knocked something.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. So the first wall folds up, and then from the floor you unfold another wall, and it creates a floor to that. And then you have a folding walls that come out and then create an additional. So that 20-foot container expands another 20 feet on each side. So 20 turns into 60, and then 60 by 20.
That's a pretty good. It's 1,200 square feet or
right.
something like
and
that.
And then, once you have that, you possibilities are endless. You can put bathrooms, kitchens in there and divide it up to a couple of bedrooms, have a living room. It becomes a usable space. And I think that those are sold for anywhere from $8,000 to $10,000 range. Pre-assembled, pre-insulated, pre-panel. You have to do nothing. I think the only thing you have to do is add.
Probably wiring, stuff like that.
Wiring and bathrooms and fixtures and things like that. But the windows and sliding doors, like patio doors, are there. So it's incredible.
I guess we kind of touched about like the homeless people, but it doesn't necessarily have to be someone who is just living on the streets homeless. I mean, it could be people who are just displaced from a living situation.
Right.
Refugees somewhere for whatever reason.
That's right.
People coming to a new country, they have nowhere to go.
Students, think of all the students, like dormitories, right? Like how much does it cost to make buildings that students have to be in different colleges, universities? You can create this I don't know if that's
millions and
millions of dollars. I'm not, I'm sure that the whole aesthetics is a challenge, and that's in architects and others to figure it out. But I'm just saying, for example, like I give you, in this technology, there is one company that is very innovative in creating the expandable or folding homes. It's called Tenfold, Tenfold Engineering. And they have all these different design ideas, which they have prototypes for and have been building and selling, as where they can expand. So they have, and I've got a website open, Joe. They have, so it's, what is it? Tenfoldengineering.com, and they have on top of the page they have this coach that expands. So it's essentially the idea of the RV. Class A RV.
Little pop-outs.
But this is much, this is like even fancier because it's expanding twice as much. And they call one a lorry, which is a delivery truck that folds into like this massive house. Then they've got a camper, so 7M trailer they call it. It was a very similar idea, but the point I'm getting at is that they have other structures that pretty much do the same. So you get a delivery, and it kind of looks like a container, and then it expands. And I'm trying to find. I think it's probably called The Real Thing. On their website, it's towards the bottom of the page where they show what that is. And a maxi. So the maxi is another one of them that a big 18-wheeler will bring it to you, leave it there, and it will expand into a massive. Yeah, they've got a whole one. So all at the bottom of the page, they say possibilities, and that's all. I think schematics. So it's one called MySpace, and then a shipping container. Let's take a look at that, because that could be an interesting.
Their website does not appear to be mobile friendly.
Oh, really? Because it's all I think it's all Flash, Yeah, tenfolds.com. So at the bottom of the home page, you'll see all different ideas. So they have Maxi, something called Solar, a tower, Shady Tree, Observer, which looks neat. It looks like a container expanded into like a double-story thing. MySpace, which looks like a container. Dr. Finlay. It looks like a mobile medical clinic. Very cool-looking K-case. K-case. Looks fancy. Another thing is called medical, and it's actually got, you can park vehicles directly underneath the building, and maybe a good application for like military or like disaster relief people. Well, disaster relief, private military, I meant to say, like private force to protect your country, not attack other people.
But that's the kind of amazing thing. There are solutions out there instead of putting people either like packed in a room or in
beach house
tents and stuff. Yeah,
they have a beach house that looks like a log cabin or a cabin of sort, and that folds into a little box.
I mean, if you take it to the beach.
Yeah. Now, I do want to say that the innovation, the tenfold innovation, is much more costly. It's not necessarily a quick, easy solution for homelessness, but there are ideas out there, and we believe in non-patent crap. So, if anybody's willing to fund you and me, Joe, then we're willing to take this tenfold to a task, and we'll show them what the patent looks like.
Yeah.
We'll make our own and bring up with solutions. Anything else you want to add? I do have a gadget. I think we need to talk about a gadget of this episode.
I do want us to add, I guess, in general, with the passive house stuff, it's just I mean, you might spend more up front, but it's a great way to lower your monthly costs, and which kind of frees up your income and also possibly frees you up to just live a more free life. You're not going to be as attached to making so much money, so you can keep paying your electricity bills, your heating bills, and all that. It kind of just lets you possibly get that another degree of freedom in your life.
More books for money. More money for books.
Yep.
That was funny. That was a Freudian slip. More money for books. More money for DVDs and videos and entertainment and popcorn.
Yep.
Yeah. Now we're talking. Joe, there's a new innovation out there. You've seen it. I've seen it. It's called Easy Gauge.
Yes.
You could use that in your passive house or your trailer home to make certain things fit.
Yeah. You could add a little flair. You could do some molding or trim or whatever it's
Right.
called. You can make pretty cool details and maybe bring it from just a little box or container home into a nice, fancy looking establishment.
Yeah, I guess and I like gadgets, I like tools, and I like talking about them. We're not selling any. We're not getting paid by any of these people yet.
Yep.
But the Easy Gauge is like a master outline gauge, and what it is it's like a little handheld device that you can put in. Like, for example, if you had like a couple of pipes sticking out of the floor and you wanted to cut a tile to a certain, a hole and, the gap in between, you can spend a lot of time and then still be all wrong. Or you could just shove this thing right where the pipes are, and it'll form its, it'll make it'll adapt to the form it needs to adapt. I'll go around and you'll lock in place, and then you'll trace it right on the tile, and then you cut the tile and put it in place, and it'll be a perfect like 2/16 or a 32nd of an inch fit, which makes it a very convenient gadget for something as little as $25.
Yeah, kind of lets your homeowner be a more professional carpenter.
Yeah, exactly. Like, this gadget allows you to do that. Like, this gadget's, because I like precision, right? But it comes to making things with my own hands, no.
Yeah.
I suck at it, right? Like, I'm quick, I'm fast, I want to get it done, and it's never right. But this gadget,
You could be right.
I could be right. Yeah. Until next time, gentlemen.
Until next time.
Please subscribe to us via iTunes, Stitcher, Google Music, and YouTube. And visit us on engineering.tech. This was Engineering Tech Show.